Howdy everybody. With Thrones of Decay on the horizon and the Empire about to get a nice new buttload of content, I figure now is as good a time as any to talk about my personal favorite mods that I like to use when I'm playing as the Empire. No frills, let's just get right into it. Despite having a handful of systems to manage like gold, growth, control, and corruption, the logistical half of Total War Warhammer's gameplay loop has always left me somewhat wanting. I mean, let's be honest, it's no Europa Universalis or Crusader Kings here. As far as I'm concerned though, it doesn't need to be. The Warhammer-based Total War games have always been about being goofier than the historical ones. This came with a lot of oversimplification in both the strategic and tactical sides of the experience, monstrous fantasy units and spellcasting for the battle portion, and the lightening of complexity of the overworld portion. For the most part, that's fine. If you're like me, however, and you end up with your eyes glazed over in the later stages of campaigns due to a lack of more engaging resource management systems, I might have just the mod for you. Crisis of Mortals, Mercs, and Management by Zorbaz is a mod that adds a suite of campaign-level changes that alter the way that you'll interact with your settlements and your armies. Settlements now have specific populations. When your armies take losses, they'll need to replenish, not from some abstract replenishment pool, but from the actual numerical populations of your town. Units draw from different pools based on their loreful makeup. You'll need to make a balanced, population-appropriate army in order to ensure that any one social caste doesn't diminish. This means that if you're fighting a war with another faction for long enough, you can actually attrition out and have to end the war that way. Commoners and soldiers provide production, which is then in turn converted into gold. Nobles provide suppression, which prevents new population-specific rebellions from occurring. Certain faction-specific buildings produce food, which is needed to prevent replenishment and public order debuffs. And on top of the changes to towns, armies now have a new system associated with them too: supply. Time spent outside your territory results in your army using up supply. Different tiers of supply come with various buffs and debuffs, mainly to your army's movement range and leadership, and on top of that, missile units can expend all of their ammo in the tactical layer, only to return to the campaign map with their quivers empty. Gone are the days of fighting multiple lightning strike battles over the course of a single turn and having those crossbows thud till the cows come home. In other words, replenishment is no longer the leading factor in determining whether or not your army needs to return to home base. There's also a mercenary system in place where provinces provide mercs based on the majority population of the region. This allows for the player to have another avenue to grab a select few units outside of their faction's roster, which is always good in my opinion. There's some nuances to this system I haven't even mentioned yet, like the fact that different Warhammer races have populations that work differently, like demons popping up in areas with high corruption or lizardmen castes being spawned in batches. There's a little more to this, and if you're interested in the specifics, be sure to check out the Steam Workshop page for a full breakdown. There's currently a submod that makes CMMM behave with the bigger faction mods, but in my experience, you gotta use all of them. If you're not hot on Legions of Nagash or something else for some reason, you'll have to turn them on to avoid a crash. Small unit addition mods to base game factions are generally pretty safe, and all in all, this has somewhat significantly changed the way that I interact with the overworld of Warhammer 3. The changes aren't sweeping enough to call it a different game or anything, but any depth above my ankles is something to be celebrated. The mod is only one that I've started using recently, but it's since become a staple of my mod list, and I'm gonna fight tooth and nail to keep it enabled. The next mod I want to talk about is actually mentioned directly in the description for CMMM. It's Tabletop Caps by Drunk Flamingo. It's fairly popular, but if you haven't used the mod before, it puts restrictions on the number of high-tier units you can field per army. This effectively kills doom stacks and makes the game, again, favor balanced armies. This and the last mod work really well in tandem. Certain units like Empire Knights and Greatswords are classified as special, where more unique units like Hellblasters and Demigryph Knights are classified as rare. This applies to both the player and AI factions. If you ever felt like you weren't engaging with certain units because there was a better, if more expensive, version available, then this might suit you. Now you've got to carefully decide if you want to focus all of your points in one area of making your army better, even your points out across different unit types, or maybe something in between. It certainly makes building unit compositions a little more engaging. From my time using the mod, I found that there's a pretty good amount of flexibility to the system, and I never found it too restrictive. The mod does, of course, come with a handy-dandy configuration menu in the MCT if you want to change anything. There are, of course, a variety of mods to include most modded units and factions outside of the super obscure stuff. In my mod list, I'm using Compatibility Patch Various by Captain Freakout. I should also point out that I'm using the Rebalance mod by Mast. I'll spare you most of the gritty details, but Mast promised that the mod focuses less on translating tabletop rules, but instead making the system work first and foremost in tandem with Total War. Things like removing special rules for legendary lords and making as many units as viable as possible. He puts it a little bit more eloquently than I do, so again, check the Steam page. While there's no game-breaking bugs that I found, it seems that he's since given up modding Warhammer 3, and it's only going to depreciate further with time and more DLCs. It's a shame because he made some pretty nice changes to the original mod that I honestly prefer. It's going to be a sad day when I'm forced to remove that one from my roster. Alright, this one might seem kind of obvious, but judging by the workshop page metrics, it's sort of niche, I guess. Your new Empire expands on the Elector Count interaction mechanics with a focus on Franz's campaign. This one's pretty beefy, so I'll start with the more obvious changes and work my way down. The Imperial Authority meter now has more positive ranks, leading to scaling buffs if you can keep the meter high. To prevent cheesing this mechanic and stacking authority like you can in the base game, the mod caps it at 15. Among those buffs is an increase to Vassal Tribute, which is helpful because the Confederation mechanic from the vanilla system has been extended. You'll need to keep Confederation candidates as vassals for a time to prove that you're trustworthy enough to join forces with. This might not appeal to everyone, as it greatly extends the time between absorbing loyal electors, but I happen to like it, as lorefully, the other Empire states get a little sweaty when Franz gobbles up an independent state and absolves its autonomy. If tomorrow, the US federal government officially consolidated all of Connecticut,
greetings from Sigmar,
and started treating it as government-owned land, you can bet that the rest of the tri-state area would be, shall we say, nonplussed. Additionally, Empire factions with higher fealty can be officially dealt with like any other faction. For example, if you raise Nordland's fealty above 6, you can grab a defensive alliance with them. I prefer this a whole lot more compared to the vanilla method of maybe they'll join your war if you're a good enough boy. The mod also makes it so minor Empire states can ally with one another. Super cool to see the states actually teaming up in an official capacity. Howdy everybody, Editor Muffintop interjecting here. The day that I finished editing this video, CA has announced that they're going to be reworking the Imperial Authority and Empire fealty mechanics. This will, without a doubt in my mind, absolutely break this portion of a mod. So I guess a little caveat for your new Empire, if you want to play this mod in its current state, you're going to want to do that before April 30th. I'm sure the modder could always try and remove or change this part of the system to work with a new CA update, but it just felt strange to me to put this part in the video here without giving that little warning. As a side note, if you're worried this means you won't see state troops until the latter half of a campaign, don't worry. Simply getting an Elector to 10 fealty will grant you access to their state troop. If anything, this should allow a determined player to get state troops much earlier than they might otherwise get them in vanilla. You could say beeline for a state whose troop you want, help them with their enemy of choice, grant them back their lands, deal with a couple dilemmas, bip bap bam, she Eldridge guards my Suitsen's gun until I unleash the Emperor's wrath. No, wait, hold on. I can do better than that. She hawks on my land until I surefire. No, wait, hold on. She Stir River patrols my stubborn bull until my noble sons are abroad. Speaking of dilemmas, the mod also adds some new ones. The biggest one changes how you interact with Marienburg. Do you decide they're rightfully independent or join Nordland in kicking their shit in? Another adds some interactability to Marcus Wolfhart's expedition. Do you send him supplies in exchange for some debuffs, have him return to help with threats on the home front, or maybe even send him south to help out Volkmar? This is cool. It adds some welcome decision making that should naturally come with being the Emperor. The mod also adds this succession mechanic where Empire successionists can come back at low enough authority or if the Empire's in enough peril, but I've basically never gotten it to trigger. And frankly, it seems a bit annoying, so I might end up turning it off in earnest. Basically, it seems like it'll hand random swaths of your territory over to rebels based on the previously mentioned criteria. Not my cup of tea, but it's there if you like that sort of thing. And there's a bunch more minor changes and tweaks that I'm not going to go into too depth on, but I will direct you again towards these beautiful breakdowns that Pear has thrown up on the workshop page. Short and informative, very useful. Divide and Confer is a relatively newer mod that's now a staple of my list. Off the bat, it does a couple things. First and foremost, it stops the AI from being able to confederate one another through diplomacy. Greenskin and Norskin confederations and special rules like that are untouched. This might sound bad, but think of it like this. Oftentimes, a lone AI with one province can field 2 armies. So in this example, Reichland has 2 armies and Talabakland has 2 armies. Then, Franz confederates his neighbor, and now can only support maybe like 3 armies. I am unsure why it works this way, probably something to do with base income, but in my experience with the base game, it just does, okay? With Divide and Confer, Franz now can't take over his neighbors that way. No confederation means no army lost, and since the two factions have naturally good relations, this eventually means a defensive alliance. Repeat with every empire state and you get the picture. Now this doesn't just apply to the Empire either. Bretonnia, Ulthuan, Nagaron, the Darklands, so on and so forth. What you end up with is not just a series of unified nations, but a series of unified nations with more armies than they'd usually have. The other main thing that the mod does is enable region trading between friendly AI factions. The gist is that factions can trade for the other settlements in a province they own the capital of. A relationship of 30 is required to unlock the ability to trade between the buyer faction and the seller faction, and the buyer faction needs a sum of gold in order to get the desired settlement. There's some nice caveats like limiting trade in the first 15 turns, a 7-turn wait on trading a region that's been recently swapped, and so on and so forth. Checks and limits that are in place to ensure that the system doesn't get abused. This is all, of course, manageable in the MCT, and it's a simple, robust system that I found leads to a more interesting late game. The Steam page ensures that the mod is compatible with most new map mods, overhauls like SFO, and start location mods. All in all, it seems safe and stable for most playthroughs. The rest of the mods in this spotlight don't really take too long to explain, so I'm gonna kinda just breeze by a bunch of them rapid fire style. Here we go. Have you ever started a heavily modded campaign and thought, man, there is just too many fucking legendary lords in this spot. This is really not balanced anymore. Living World assuages some of that pressure by spreading out existing legendary lords out into the map a little more evenly. In addition to that, certain tweaks have been made to alter the alliances, non-aggression pacts, and starting wars to suit the new start positions. The version I'm using is even compatible with Immortal Empires Expanded, Draika and Ogre Country, Helmengorst and Nippon. If your campaign feels a little too crowded, this might help even things out. Hey, look at Ostermark actually survived past turn 10. Sweet. Imperial Faith adds new skills for generic lords that are associated with the pantheon of gods of the Empire. This is kind of like the system that's in place for Lizardmen gods in the base game. Love that the modding community consistently takes things that were intended to be like uniques to add flavor to other factions and just kind of paints them over with an Empire skin. I'm not being sarcastic at all. Please make more of these. This one's actually been handed over to another modder to manage, and it has a sub-mod that's been keeping the mod kosher with the newer updates. No city information bar. Ever zoom out and have this happen? Don't want to see that anymore? Boom. No city information bar. I have a feeling most people know about this one, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it just in case. Empire Knightly Orders adds a variety of Empire Knight chapter houses all over the Empire and abroad. They're side grades to the vanilla unit that come with special quirks depending on the chapter's lore. Holy Orders and Questing Knights and that kind of thing. Something minor, but it adds some welcome flavor. Garrison Training. Ever feel like some of the Empire forts get breezed by in the late game? Every city garrison will gain training ranks the longer they've been alive. And this works, of course, for everyone, not just the Empire. Oh man, definitely Fudging Vassals for the new Empire mechanics. This one adds a couple pop-ups for wrangling your dumbass vassals into behaving the way you want. Things like transferring settlements to who you want to have them and taking them away from who you don't. And this one's so minor, but it's very useful for when you have a bunch of unit mods like the ones I use. If you've got a larger monitor, high resolution UI. I mean, I don't even have to say anything, just look at that. And that should about do it. I'll post my whole mod list somewhere because people usually ask for that kind of thing. If you've at all enjoyed this video or found a mod you like, consider subscribing. Sometime in the near future, I'm going to go over some of the wacky human factions that modders have graciously put together for us, so stick around for that. Aside from that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.